Mel, 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 Mel. Everybody, I'm Cantonese Cat. Hey everyone, I want to go through this weekend on a few fintech stocks. Try and put them all in one video if I can, depending on how it goes. This is SOFI, the monthly chart of SOFI. What you're really seeing here, it's been pretty clear in terms of what's been happening. It's formed a very, very nice cup over down here, and we was trying to break about this cup over here is broken in very, very big increasing volume. So there's no doubt that this breakout over here is real. What's been happening after that was you end up having a couple back tests over here onto this whole breakout over here. You even argue there might be 1, 2, and 3 back tests. And it does have a little bit of like a, how do you say that, a little bit of deckhead bounce kind of look to it. And it's a little bit scary for a lot of people, but basically it does look a little bit more like a consolidation than anything. If you think about this as a cycle, if you think about this as a liquidity cycle, it does look more like this is just consolidating sideways before some potential breakout. Although it does have a little bit of a look, it does make you think a little bit twice, doesn't it? And the volume also seems to be a little bit larger over here. Although it does seem like the sell volume has been started, really kind of getting exhausted here a little bit. And this range so far has been holding. And because the liquidity cycle seems to be on the way up, based on looking at the S&P 500, based on looking at the NASDAQ, based on looking at Bitcoin, I'm going to give this a benefit of the doubt that this is just consolidation sideways. And if you actually look at Fintel.io, I do not have the picture here to show you. There's still actually a very, very much of an increase institutional buying for SOFI. So this seems to be reaccumulation to me, despite looking at the volume. Now, one thing to kind of help you to visualize that would be to look at the Heikin-Ashi candles. If you look at the Heikin-Ashi candles, I think the picture looks a little bit more clear. What Heikin-Ashi candles does is it helps summarize the current candle by averaging it together with the candle that was last period. So these are monthly candles. Each of these candles, they're going to basically represent about 2 months of price action, if you will. If you look at this, it's a pretty clear picture. It had a pretty significant breakdown down here, trying to bounce back up, form a little bit of a cup and handle kind of pattern, broke above, and now it's trying to form like a very, very big kind of like a second cup, a very prolonged handle, if you will, which kind of, invalidates it a little bit based on traditional cup and handle sense. But what you're seeing here is pretty clear. It had a little bit of a back test here, and it passed, and then it ended up having some pretty significant buying volume that came in, and then it ended up trying to do a second back test down here, and this back test ended with a little bit of a tweezer bottom over here. This over here seems to also be ending a little bit with a tweezer bottom over here. So if you do a summarized trend, trying to smooth out some of these candles and look at less of the volatility, it actually does look like this is more of like a back test once and twice back onto this breakout range. And the volume in terms of the selling is actually not quite as big as the buying. So that's one way to kind of, think about it. The other way to kind of think about it is if you pull up the Bollinger Band, even on the Heikin-Ashi, you can tell it's not just back testing this area of horizontal resistance turn support zone here, is also back testing a very much of a positive sloping 20-month moving average. So it's probably going to more likely serve as a good support rather than resistance, and it's most likely going to hold even if it ends up wicking down a little bit, and it's most likely going to end up holding. I'm going to take out the Heikin-Ashi candles over here. Even when I take out the Ashi candles, you can still see that it is still trying to find support of this upsloping 20-month moving average. And that's exactly kind of what it's doing right now. It's just kind of back testing this average right here before potentially is bullish continuation. Or if it ends up breaking down by a lot, there's also a second scenario where I'm wrong, right? You can also end up going down a lot. And when that ended up happening, you're going to end up potentially having 20-month moving average and then flattening a little bit and be a little bit more indecisive moving forward. The more time it spends above the 20-month moving average, the better. The more time it spends on the upper part of the Bollinger Band, the better. So I want to keep on seeing this potential trend to develop, and I want to keep seeing how it's going to end up staying above the 20-minute moving average. I want to see it finding support over here. So far, if you look at it again, it looks like a little bit like a tweezer bottom over here. It looks a little bit like a tweezer bottom over here. There's a little bit of very similar kind of outlook over here, where you see there's a big monthly bearish engulfing candle and having a little bit of a smaller hammer over here before continuation. So far this month we did end up having a very, very big bearish engulfing candle last month, and so far we're forming a little bit of a doji. I don't expect it to just kind of end up reversing because of this big giant bearish engulfing candle. Probably end up having some consolidation here, finding support, and you do see a lot of support in the horizontal zone over here. You also see a lot of support over in the 20-month moving average coiling up over here. So far this is kind of what it's looking like to me. Now the other thing I also want to look at, of course, is the Ichimoku cloud, right? You end up having a Tenkan line over here, which continue to serve as resistance. Unfortunately, I would really like to see this being flipped as support, and it might end up doing that over the next few months or so. But I would really like to see this Tenkan being flipped back into support. So that's a little bit of an unfortunate event over here, but it did end up having a bullish cross over the Kijun. Kijun is a lagging line, Tenkan is a leading line. So I do want to see this being a little bit more upward pointing, and I do want to see this bullish cross here play out rather than having a bearish cross down here. We'll see what happens. We'll closely monitor the situation, of course. If you look at the volume shelves, and you also look at the Fibonacci level, that's also going to tell you a little bit in terms of what's happening. This big giant volume shelf over here, where price has kind of just been oscillating around here, this is going to be a very, very important magnet zone for the price of SOFI. Now, price did kind of break down a little bit over here last month, is trying to break back about this level over here, and it's having a little bit of a hard time doing so, but that's okay. I think it's building a little bit more of a bottoming type process over here, based on the confluence of this volume shelf, based on the horizontal support zone over here, flip from resistance to support, and also based on the 20-month moving average crawling up. I do think that this area most likely is going to hold. We'll see what happens. And if I'm wrong, it might end up being a little bit more ambiguous. But so far the indicators are telling me that this is still a longer term bull trend that's been developed over the last 20 months pointing upwards. So we'll see what happens. Now, if we also pull up the Fibonacci levels from the all-time high down to the all-time low and trying to figure out what it's trying to do, the key thing here is actually, I did this Fibonacci level before. The level is actually not 7.52 but 7.51. It did end up breaking down below that level a little bit. It's trying to backtest it a little bit. I think it's having a little bit initial trying to break back above, but I do think that because of the horizontal support zone that we're seeing, because of the 20-month moving average that we're seeing, I do think that most likely it's going to end up breaking back above of that, and it's going to end up having some bullish continuation. But so far, 7.51 is also a very important Fibonacci level that's also serving a little bit as a magnet in terms of what it's doing right now, both in terms of volume shelf, both in terms of this horizontal zone, and both in terms of the 20-month moving average. There's a lot of confluence over here, and I think that is just trying to do what it can to find a solid support here before breaking back out. We'll see what happens, obviously. If you want to take out this some of these indicators over here, you just want to take a look at the weekly and see what it's trying to do. The weekly has been looking very much of a similar kind of fractal as it did before. Before you have a little bit of an atom, sorry, this is an Eve, an atom double bottom, right? And we're a little smoother bottom over here and a little bit of a sharper bottom over here. And you do have a couple of, staircases going down here. You have like legs number 1, 2, and 3 going down. Here you also have legs number 1, 2, and 3 going down, right? So it's looking a little bit of a very, very similar fractal that you're kind of seeing over here. First of all, over here you see that there's another Eve kind of bottom over here. It looks like it's trying to form a little bit of a sharper bottom over here with an atom bottom over here. It had, really like legs number 1, 2, and 3 going down. And this looks a little bit very similar to over here too, right? Like one going down and trying down a little bit here, going back up over here, very similar kind of local top over here before going down. And Ryan's trying to find a little bit like a sharper kind of bottom, trying to point back up here. So it does look a very, very similar fractal between here and there. If you are going to pull up the bull market support band, what you can see is there's just a lot of oscillating in price over here, and price to break down below the Bollinger Support Band, but it doesn't matter to me because what happens when it breaks back up? Like, it's not going to be very, very good support anyway. So what makes you think that it's going to be a very, very strong resistance, right? It's just been oscillating between over here for closer to like 8 or 9 months, and it's basically forming a lot of these kind of really meaningless kind of price action over here. Also in between these two, it's forming a little bit of like, this like double top, double bottom kind of thing. And I can see this in a lot of different things during its bull market on its way up. I can see that even with Bitcoin, on the way here, you can see a little bit of like a double top, double bottom kind of thing over here. And I was reminded, if I look at, things like a firm, I can see a lot of these kind of like double top kind of thing, double bottom kind of thing. And also remember, seeing things like Palantir on its way up. You can see a lot of these kind of like double top, double bottom kind of formation, consolidation, and it can break underneath the bull market support band here for a substantial amount of time, like for about a month and a half over here, and it still end up having is bullish continuation because the market trend seems to still be up. Again, if you look at the monthly, that's what you're showing, right? So it's a little bit oscillating over here, it's a little bit indecision over here. But we'll see what happens though. The other thing I want to show you is, despite of this looking kind of consolidating, the monthly 20-month moving average is pointing up, and also the weekly moving averages. If you pull up the 20, you pull up the 50, and you pull up the 100. 20 above a 50, above 100 weekly moving average, all three of them are pointing up. You don't quite get the nice separation between 20 and 50, unfortunately, but they're still pointing up. And right now it does seem like we got getting a little bit, supported by a positive pointing 100 and got rejected by a little bit of positive pointing 50. Now, do I think a positive pointing weekly moving average is going to serve as a very strong resistance level over the longer term? The answer is probably not. The more it's positive pointing, the less likely it's going to serve as a very, very strong resistance at all. Sometimes if you see these kind of positive pointing moving averages, like the 20 and 50 pointing up over here, price can just end up like getting sliced through it like it's nothing, right? I mean, I think these are some very, very poor resistance level. And you also just recently have like all these bullish crosses over here in terms of 20 and 100, in terms of 50 and 100. So this really is looking like a very, very nice bull trend that has been developing over the last few months. And you have 20 over 50 over 100, all three are pointing up. So this is, in my mind, no doubt, this is still very much of a bull trend. So that's kind of what I'm seeing with SOFI. The other stock I want to talk a little bit about, and I'm going to combine this together with SOFI here, is Robinhood. Hood is a very, very different look to it. Hood looks extremely bullish, but Hood also look extremely overextended. I'm just going to pull back up here on the monthly chart over here. If you look at the monthly chart, it's pretty clear in terms of what it's doing. It's been consolidating over here for about 2 years. It had a very, very big clean breakout. And if you also look at the volume, there's no doubt that this volume of breakout is very, very strong, right? So far, you have a little bit of consolidation over here. So far, this month is about half over. So you're end up going to having a little bit of, if you imagine this volume is going to end up doubling, it's still not going to be as high as these kind of volume over here. So it does look like it's kind of consolidating here a little bit. And where's it consolidating at? It's consolidating over here at this volume shelf over here. So the bottom of the volume shelf so far is around like 17.8 or so. The top of the volume shelf where it's getting rejected is around 20. I did mention a lot of my posts before, and also on my previous video, I don't think it's just going to end up breaking above. I do end up thinking it's going to end up consolidating over here for quite some time. The reason why is because it's just way above the upper Bollinger Band. The Bollinger Band is expanding. It's going to allow price to keep on going up over time. It's going up and down like this, very, very nicely expanding. So this is going to be a very, very nice bull trend moving forward. But price just got way above the upper Bollinger Band, like it's right all the way up to like the low 20s. When the Bollinger Band over down here was really only about like 16 and 16.5. So the Bollinger Band did end up going up to 17.6 this month, but price obviously got rejected around the 20 level from around volume shelf over here, and it back tested the it back tested the upper Bollinger Band and actually found support and bounced up, right? Ended up touching upper Bollinger Band, which is what it really all needs to do. Bollinger Band continue to expand. I think price is going to end up going higher. Could it end up having another month of sideways next month? That's entirely possible. But does it really matter though? You're having a big squeeze over here with the Bollinger Band You're having a very positive pointing up 20-month moving average. You have a very clear breakout. Do you think it's going to backtest all the way back down to like 13 and 14? Probably not. Not with these kinds of volume, not with the way that it's looking right now. I think it could continue to consolidate over here around this volume shelf. It might even go back down to potentially around like 17 or so, or even potentially going down to like 16 or so, 16.2 or so, depending on what the macro shows, right? I mean, sure, like a firm ended up doing something very similar and ended up consolidating here for about 4 months now. So who's to say Robinhood won't do the same thing? Although if earnings turn out to be very favorable, this might just end up being a brief consolidation before it continues to go up, because of just how powerful this accumulation range over here for about 2 years. If you look at the couple of things here, if you look at the Ichimoku cloud, you want to see how far extended it is away from the Tenkan and Kijun. It's pretty far overextended. So that's also another reason why I think it might end up consolidating here for another month, while you end up having the Kijun and the Tenkan kind of point up a little bit, maybe over another month or so. So that's kind of where we are. Like price, if it gets too far above the Tenkan and Kijun on the monthly, it tends to end up consolidating or even correcting down a little bit before its bullish continuation. So if you look at the Ichimoku cloud, you can see that things are a little bit overextended. It might need to cool down here a little bit, and this is exactly what it's doing. If you look at the Super Ichi cloud, it might give you a little bit of a different story here. It hasn't even had this bullish cross like the regular Ichimoku cloud, but so far the Tenkan has been flipped from resistance to support, and the price is not too entirely far from the Super Ichi cloud Tenkan, which is around 15.8. Price currently is around 18. So this is actually not too far overextended. You look at the Super Ichi, but Super Ichi is also a little bit more taking into account like recent volume, and it's going to be, a little bit, faster moving, if you will. There are a lot of reasons to think that it might continue to go sideways here. But if you look at the weekly bull in Japan, it doesn't have to correct that much more anymore from the bull in Japan perspective. It could potentially keep going much higher over the next few weeks, but that might still end up resulting in some consolidation sideways here. The one thing though is a little bit overextended away from the 20-week moving average. Now don't get me wrong, in a very impulsive bull market, price can keep going up and doesn't even have to touch the 20-week moving average, right? Just like when on a very, very impulsive bear market like we did have over here, price doesn't have to touch the 20-week moving average until maybe even months and months and months further out. Eventually it did end up touching it. It's very negative sloping, so what's going to happen is going to end up saying slap, you're not going to get above me because I'm very strong, very powerful, negative sloping 20-week moving average. So what ends up happening is you end up getting a big giant rejection over here back in March of 2022, and you end up getting much further down leg over here, and until you end up having a little bit of a bottoming process over here until the 20-week moving average is really starting to kind of flatten out, that's when you end up having a trend change. Right now, there's no indication there's going to be a trend change. Now, a little bit of a troublesome thing is the 20-week moving average is at 14, so you end up back testing it, that would be a risk level down here, right? But if you end up back testing it, the 20-week moving average is also be pointing up, right? So those two could potentially meet around 16 or so. It doesn't have to. Obviously, price can just keep on going for quite some time without even touching it if it is indeed a change of macro environment, if it is indeed a change where we think that Robinhood is going to be doing very well moving forward, and there's no argument from a fundamental standpoint that it has to go higher, then it will, but there are some issues in terms of the technicals here. What is clear, though, is that this big giant breakout over here is on very big volume. This big breakout over here is on big giant weekly volume, and the continuation is also on relatively high volume over here as well. And you knew that that was going to come because before that, the leg up was also very, very strong, very high volume, and the leg down over here is also on very declining volume. So you knew that this move is going to come. You just don't know when it's going to come. You don't know how far below the 20-week moving average is going to go down before going up. But it does look like, it was going to happen. It also looked like it was going to happen even building up from here, like big buy volume, pathetic sell volume over here for like 4 months. This is also kind of what I'm seeing maybe playing out here for a firm here a little bit. I might make that on a second video, but you have a very, very strong, powerful buying and very strong, powerful buying over here. Now, guess what price is doing? It's consolidating over here. It's forming a little bit of a bull flag over here on declining volume. That's exactly what you want to see in a bull trend. So again, it doesn't necessarily have to back test this. You can just keep going up a little bit further. But do I think that things need to be in maybe a little bit more consolidating sideways before up? I do think that that's a possibility. Based on what I'm looking at, probability-wise speaking, it just makes sense for it to do that. But again, it doesn't have to. Right? If you look at the Ichimoku cloud on the weekly, you can see that the Tenkan is also very much, slowly catching up over here. I do think that if the Tenkan continue to go up over here and the price may consolidate sideways over here, you might end up potentially finding some support around the 17 zone from the Tenkan over the next 2 or 3 4 weeks or so before its bullish continuation. I at least want to see it getting a little bit closer to the weekly Tenkan, because weekly Tenkan is, you don't want to get a little bit too far from it. Although again, if things get very impulsive, then it doesn't matter. But generally, the weekly Tenkan tends to have a lot more touches than the 20-week moving average. And I do want to see it kind of get a little bit closer to the weekly Tenkan, serve a little bit of a foundation before pushing up further. So that's kind of what I'm seeing here with Robinhood. For Robinhood, it's a little bit harder to draw the Fibonacci levels, because if you draw all the way from the all-time high, it's like ridiculous. Like, do I expect this to really push all the way up to like the 80s? I don't know, right? But if you look at something here on the Fibonacci level, something interesting is happening here. What is happening here is that you have a breakout of the 0.136 Fibonacci retracement level, and currently all it is doing right now is forming a little bit of bull flag over here on declining volume on a back test of this Fibonacci level around 17.5, 17.6 or so. I would not be surprised if it end up consolidating over here, maybe even drop down below it a little bit over the next few weeks before its bullish continuation. And the next logical level is going to be around 25.5. After that, it's going to be a level up here at 37, which you do have some price history over here, is going to be serving as potential target or magnet, if you will, and also potentially as a resistance up here. Again, if you look at the volume shelves, it does end up having a little bit of price history up here around the low 30s. So I think it's probably going to end up doing that. Is it going to have to spend a lot of time here at the 25 zone? Not necessarily, because it didn't really spend a lot of time last time, right? If it ends up pushing up, it might end up pushing to the volume shelf up here around the 34 range, around the time when it first started IPO. But this could potentially theoretically serve as a little bit of resistance around 25 here too. So we'll see. This is Robinhood. Now I would like to talk about yet another one to try to help kind of bundle all these stocks together. One that I find to be a very similar boat with SOFI and with Robinhood is SQ, Block. Block Inc., if you look at the monthly down here, you can see that it's just been kind of going sideways over here for about two years or so. And it's building up a lot of energy over here. It's basically very much of a consolidation, very much of like a Wyckoff accumulation type look to it. And the key thing here is, because it's been ranging around here for so long, what is the trend? Is the trend bucking? Well, one thing you want to look at if you want to see whether or not the trend's changing is to see what the whales are doing. The whales are slowly decreasing their outflow over here for about a year and a half, and for the last half a year or so from this bounce over here, which served as a spring, you really start to have a lot more buying pressure down here from whales. You can see that this is a whale indicator by Black Cat, and what you're seeing is that there's a constant inflow and decrease in outflow, constant inflow over the last few months, when price has just kind of gone consolidating sideways. This is generally a good sign, actually. You see this consolidation, you see whales coming in, that generally is a good sign that the whales may know what's going on. They might want to keep on accumulating here at this range before its potential breakout. Now, if you pull up some of the other indicators about the Bollinger Band, you can see that price has spent the last 5 months above the 20-month moving average, and 20-month moving average is also pointing up slightly. The Bollinger Band is also expanding. It's going to allow price to go up even further. On a bull market, the upper Bollinger Band can potentially serve as a little bit of a magnet. Right now, the upper Bollinger Band is around 90. So there's a potential that it can continue to consolidate over here. There's a big resistance zone right here around 80. That's the problem, right? But it's been spending a lot of time trying to break up out of it, especially here over the last few months. It's been spending a significant amount of time trying to break through that. resistance zone. So I do think that over the next couple months or so, we're probably going to end up breaking above that and going much higher. The volume shelf over here, if you put a volume shelf, I'm going to date this back all the way back to here. You can see what it's doing, right? It's trying to break above this big giant volume shelf, and the top part is going to be around 90. And it spends a significant amount of history over here for really the last several years, dating all the way back to 2018. So it's a little bit of a difficult way to kind of break above it, but right now it is kind of back testing, higher volume areas over here. It looks like it's kind of doing a little bit of a back test before its bullish continuation here. So I do think that there is a lot of things to kind of get a little bit encouraged about over here. And if you also look at the Fibonacci level from its all-time high down to this cycle low down here, I do see this being a little bit of very similar to Robinhood, where it ended up breaking above, doing a little bit of back test over here, and trying to find some solid grounding over here before its bullish continuation, pushing up to like the 90s, if you will. I do think once it breaks above this volume shelf around like 91, 92 or so, it's probably going to end up hitting close to 100 in a hurry. Some of the other areas up here, we'll put some of the other indicators and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But so far it seems like it's just kind of like a breakout over here on pretty decent volume on this 0.136 Fibonacci level and doing a little bit of back test over here. That's kind of what it's looking like it's doing to me. Now, that is the Bollinger Band. That is the Fibonacci level. I do want to show you the Ichimoku cloud. It still doesn't have the bullish cross yet, but it did end up flipping the Tenkan over here, which has served as resistance for so long, ended up flipping it back into support. So Tenkan as support, Kijun as resistance above, but Kijun generally serves as relatively poor resistance anyway compared to Tenkan. Tenkan really is the key here, and it flipped that as a resistance to support. When it did that on pretty reasonable high volume over here. So I do think this is a real move. What you're going to end up seeing is we'll see what happens. I would like to see Tenkan to kind of point up, and I think it will because right now it's still averaging some of these candles over here. That I think over the next couple of months or so, Tenkan's going to end up keep pointing up, and it's going to end up serving as pretty decent support. Now you can see that Tenkan right now is at 93, so I do think that 90s are going to be maybe a little bit of a resistance zone right up above. But once it breaks above that, I think it could potentially hit the 130s, just like you're seeing on the Fibonacci levels. Just like you're seeing on the volume shelf over here, there's a little bit of price history here in the 130s over here as well, around late 2021, early 2022. So I do think this probably end up going to break above and back test the Ichimoku cloud here from the bottom part of it. And do I think it's going to end up passing the first time? No, I do think it's probably end up going to consolidate over here, maybe around late 2024, around early 2025 or so. You might have doing a little bit of consolidation over here before its bullish continuation. The top of the cloud is around 160, 161. I do think it's probably going to end up hitting the top of the cloud perhaps sometime around like 2025 is my best estimate, because I do see a little bit of a decent trend change over here. The volume is also very supportive too, because you end up having more green volumes over here as opposed to sell volume. I do think the selling volume over here has been severely exhausted. I do think that we end up having a pretty significant spring here. Any kind of deleveraging has already happened over here. If they are over leveraging, that's already deleverage over here too, on relatively low volume, kind of falling knife move over down here. And this got reversed with just 2 candles. So I do think that we're really seeing a lot of bullish development over here. If you look at it weekly, it's going to give you a lot more clear thing in terms of what it's doing. I'm just going to put up the weekly, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to put up the bull market support band over here. And you can see that what it's really doing is it broke above the bull market support band over here convincingly. And for years now, it's just been kind of down sloping. It did have a little bit of upward sloping over here, although it didn't hold. But the majority of it has been downward sloping here, except for maybe for like a couple months over here. Right now, you really spend really since November 2023 with the bull market support band really pointing up, and serve as support over here once and serve as support here over here twice. It's still upward sloping, so I think it's going to continue to end up serving as a support band during bull market. And I do see that the uptrend over here has higher volume, although you can see that the buy volume over here, as it gets to this very key horizontal resistance zone over here, end up getting exhausted. So I did think over here you're going to have having a little bit of a back test of the bullish support band before its bullish continuation, and exactly what it's end up doing. And when you had the earnings last time, it was a very, very nice green candle. So I did see a little bit of a back test of this horizontal zone over here. And sure enough, it did do that. I ended up breaking back above it a little bit, but because the volume was kind of declining, I was showing a little bit of a concern. I was like, yeah, I'm not sure if it's going to breaking out because people are not convinced yet, the whales are not convinced yet it's going to break back out just here, right just now. So the volume is declining. I did think that's probably end up going down, back test some of the stuff down here. Could back test to 20, possibly. Could it back test, the bonus support band also includes a 20-week moving average, sorry, just want to let you know. Could it back test to 20? Sure. Could it back test some of the other levels down here? For example, like the 50-week moving average is pointing up. 100-week moving average is also, flattening over here. There also look like there could be a 50 over 100 kind of bullish crossover here over the next months or so. You're going to end up getting a pretty nice full weekly bull trend over here, 20 over 50 over 100, which is going to signify some better things to come. So it would not surprise me a bit at all if it ended up back testing down here, find a better foundation before going up, but it doesn't have to, because so far the selling volume over the last couple of weeks have been absolutely pathetic. So even though the buyers didn't have enough commitment and push it up above this range over here, sellers also didn't really seem to have much commitment to really try to push it back further. Now, that can change, right? If you end up picking some higher selling volume candles over here, can end up pushing back down below, but there's plenty of support down below. There's also plenty of support down below over here, when you look at a volume shelf over here too, plenty of support down below. This is big giant volume shelf, and right now we're near the top of it, so I'm not really too worried about that. If you look at the weekly Ishimoku cloud, you can also see that it's been bouncing from the weekly Tenkan up here. It kind of back tested the Tenkan, found support, and it could potentially just bounce from here and just keep going up because it's a weekly bull trend, because it's a bull market. So we'll see what happens. Though I like the fact that it's touching the weekly Tenkan, and it may be good enough to serve as support between the confluence of the weekly Tenkan and the bull market support penny. Might end up just keep on having its bullish continuation to challenge some of the upper levels, or it may not. What I'm trying to show you though too is there was a very important pattern that I was noticing, and I call this the broadening wedge pattern. Depends on where you draw the line, because all these things are kind of wicks, right? If you draw a line right there, all it's doing is it has a very high volume breakout, and it's just doing a low volume back test. So again, that's another evidence that there could be a little bit of a confluence here as support, right? So there's a big possibility where the zone around here in the mid 70s could hold before its bullish continuation. But if you draw that, depending where you draw it, if you draw it with the wick over here, it might still end up, not really breaking above the whole trend line right here. You might still end up getting like, some of these big, a little bit higher volume rejection up here at this line. Regardless, it doesn't matter to me where you draw that line. Regardless, I still think that this is a bullish pattern. That's called a descending broadening wedge. And I really saw this pattern, right? When price came down here, I was like, hey, it looks like there's a trend line here. It looks like this could be forming a bullish, descending broadening wedge over here. And sure enough, it looks like it's exactly doing that. Depending if you draw the line right there with the wicks, or depending if you draw the line right here with the wicks down here, it could be doing a little bit of back test, or it could still end up trying to break above of it. To me, it doesn't really matter. There's a big confluent zone over here between the bull market support band, and also between the Ishimoku cloud, between the Tenkan over here. I do think that we might be at a very strong support zone, and also if you look at the volume shelf, I do think that we're at a pretty strong support zone to potentially bounce out from here, depending on what the macro is, depending on whether or not they, whatever game they want to play, I don't really care. It can end up breaking down below that support. I don't care, but so far, what it's doing right now, it formed a high here, form a high low here, form a higher high here, and it's trying to find a higher low. I don't really care what the higher low is. It could drop all the way down to the high 60s for all I care, but it still looks like a pretty decent bull trend. Anyway, I spent about 35 minutes talking about just three stocks. Talking about SOFI, talk about Robinhood, talk about Square or Block. I'm going to make another video here real quick and try to split them between the two so these doesn't get too long. But anyway, thank you for listening. Have a good one. Bye.